Hello, and welcome back to Drawing Conclusions. My name is Luen Keller, and I'm an aspiring artist / graphic novelist who wants to get better at doing art and also who loves books. So if you like either of those things, you're in the right place. If you're new to this series, I review books while at the same time redesigning the cover of that book as if it were going to be a graphic novel. I'll start out with like a short synopsis, an introduction, and content warning of the book. If you're interested in reading the book but you don't want any spoilers, you can just watch that and stop. But if you did read the book and you want like a little refresher on what happened, I'm going to go through the entire plot. Or if you're not interested in reading the book at all, you can just listen to what happens in the book without having to read it. And then at the very end, I will give my review of the book and what I thought. I'll also at the very end talk about the graphic novel cover that I made. But yeah, let's get into it. I'm pretty excited about the book I read. It was kind of interesting. So yeah. The book I read this week was The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. It was published last year in 2023, and it's a historical fiction. I want to say that it also won Barnes & Noble's like Book of the Year. At least I think that's what I remember it saying when I went and bought this book. It was also like 50% off, and so I figured it must be pretty good if it was going to be Book of the Year, so I took a chance, and I'm pretty glad that I did. There's a lot of different plots kind of happening in this book, but I will say that what the book is about is this community living in a town called Pottstown, Pennsylvania in, I want to say, the 1930s. The people in this community are mostly African American and European immigrants who are Jewish. And it's kind of how their lives weave together and how they come together ultimately to protect this boy from being institutionalized in Penhurst Asylum, which if you know anything about history is one of the worst places ever. But like I said, there's a lot going on. If you really like historical fiction, you're gonna like this a lot. Not much to say in the content warning. There were some mentions of like abuse, like possible sexual abuse, but not like, it did not go in detail. In fact, I would say this book gets a PG-13 rating, but only because that is in it, not because it was described graphically. There's also death and drinking, but really it was, I mean, as far as content warning goes, it was pretty tame. So that is my little synopsis. You should go read the book. It was pretty good, but let's get into the plot. So like I said, this book does a lot. It does a lot in a good way. But I'm gonna give you everything I got. I'm gonna just say this. Okay, so there is a prologue to the book, but really, like, you could almost, is this going into my review? I don't know. You could almost enjoy the book without the prologue. The book starts in the 70s, and like these construction workers found a skeleton, and they also found like a Jewish pendant, and they took it to the only Jewish person in town that they know, and it kind of, that like starts the beginning, the unraveling of the story. But really where the book begins is in the 1930s with Moshe Ludlow, who is a theater owner and who's actually on the brink of destruction because of some advertisement error. He booked a show and nobody's going to show up, and so he's worried that he's going to lose all his money. Goes into the Heaven and Earth grocery store to seek some solace, where he meets Chona, who is the owner of the shop's daughter. They fall in love pretty immediately and get married, and actually he ends up fixing the advertisement error, and lots of people come to the show and he makes a ton of money. Everything works out totally fine, which is great. And he meets someone there named Malachi, who is an immigrant from Europe and who loves dancing. And they become friends, but he kind of rushes off after the dance. He's going to come back later in the story as Moshe's friend, so I just thought I would mention him. After they get married, Chona convinces Moshe to open his theater to what may be the largest demographic in the place that they are living, African Americans. A particular part of their town, Pottstown, is called Chicken Hill, which is like up on this slope, and most of the people there are either African American or they're Jewish. Moshe, up until this point, had restricted his theater to just kind of like Jewish shows, but then he opened it up to the African American population, which in the 30s wasn't a very popular decision. But his wife convinced him to do it. His wife, by the way, is terrific and is probably one of my favorite characters, maybe ever. She's just really open-hearted and loving and kind. And like Moshe at one point insists that they move out of the poor part of town off of Chicken Hill down into Pottstown, like proper. And she says no, because she's running the grocery store and she feels like that's an integral part of the community and she won't do it. So they just stay in Pottstown. Even though they could afford to leave, she doesn't want to. So Moshe grows successful. Chona is really beloved by everybody in town, both by the Jewish people and by the African American population. Just like, she's really awesome. Unfortunately, she gets sick, which kind of starts a chain of events. She gets so sick, she starts having like seizures, and then she ends up like getting this fever and she's in bed for a really long time. It's kind of a sad situation. And at this point, Malachi comes back into their life. To me, he's like a symbol of like comfort almost. He comes back into their life, and right around that time, Chona starts to get better, but she's never quite the same. She still has seizures sometimes, and she still is like a lot weaker than she used to be, but she like reopens the store and she tries to go back to daily life. Around this time, the person who Moshe is closest to in town is Nate. Nate technically works for Moshe at the theater. He is African American, but Moshe feels that Nate, like, they're pretty good friends, I would say. Not, like, the best of friends. Like, Nate does work for Moshe, but Nate is someone that Moshe respects and trusts a lot. Nate and his wife, Addie, are really good friends with Moshe and with Chona. In fact, Addie helps Chona run the Heaven and Earth grocery store. Around this time, the state comes to take Dodo, who is Nate's nephew, who Nate is taking care of. Dodo is deaf due to an accident that he had when he was younger. It was like an explosion caused by a stove, and he ended up losing his hearing because of it. Started out being able to hear, so he can talk to people pretty fine, but he just can't hear people. The state has come around and insisted that they take Dodo away to Pennhurst, which says that they have like a school in there, but like nobody has heard great things about Pennhurst, and there's not a lot of hope for Dodo if he goes there. Nate approaches Moshe, who then approaches Chona about hiding Dodo at their place while the state is looking for Dodo. Chona agrees immediately. In fact, they were gonna hide him at the theater in the basement, and Chona is like, that is ridiculous. It is cold. He will be hungry. That's a terrible idea. Bring him here. So Dodo goes to live with Chona and Moshe at the grocery store, which like they live in the little apartment above the grocery store. People have come to look for Dodo at the store, and Chona just turns them away. She even enlists the help of her neighbor, Bernice, and like when the state comes around, she kind of like puts Dodo in the backyard, like with Bernice's other kids, so he just kind of blends in. They hide Dodo pretty well from the state. So Dodo is living with Moshe and Chona at the grocery store while the state is looking for him. Now at this time, the state approaches Doc Roberts, who sucks. He is a member of the local KKK, and he's just like a bad person. He's the only doctor in town, but he's like racist and a jerk, so not a lot of people go to see him. But he also had a crush on Chona, I guess, when she was a teen, like when they went to high school together. Anyway, so the rumor is going around that Dodo is hiding over at Chona's. They don't really know how this information got out. No one's saying anything, but the rumor got around that Dodo is staying with Chona, but the state can't prove it. So they approach Doc Roberts for some reason, and they're like, hey, can you like go talk to Chona and just see if she will give him up? Which the doc agrees to because he used to have a crush on her. So he's kind of interested to see what might happen. Doc goes to visit Chona at the Heaven and Earth grocery store. Chona didn't know that he was coming, like the state, like she can usually tell when the state is coming. She didn't know that Doc was coming. So Dodo is there in the store. In fact, he's in the basement and he can kind of see what's happening. But Chona is like giving him the signal, like, don't, just stay there. Don't do anything crazy, just stay. So the doc comes in, he's talking to Chona, things get a little heated and Chona starts having a seizure. They're like, oh, well, he's a doctor, right? So she has a seizure. Doc like goes around the counter to supposedly try to help her. Dodo is watching all this from like the basement, and like Doc doesn't come back around. Like Dodo's worried about what's going on. So Dodo like comes out of the basement, looks over, and Doc Roberts is like feeling up Chona post-seizure. Dodo is obviously upset by this. I want to say Dodo is like, by the way, I should have said this, like he's like maybe like 12. So he's upset by this because he and Chona have grown pretty close while he's been staying with her, and she's treated him really well and he likes her a lot. So this is a pretty upsetting sight, and he ends up attacking Doc Roberts to get him off of Chona. And Addie, about this time, Nate's wife, comes in and kind of sees this whole situation, and Chona starts having another seizure at this time. So Addie is trying to take care of Chona, and Doc is getting attacked by Nate, but Nate lets go because Chona's having another seizure, and Doc runs away, and like people are starting to come into the store, and it's like this huge scene, and Doc goes and gets the police because he was attacked by Dodo. The state is looking for him, and the police come, and Dodo runs out the back door, and he like runs like up some stairs, and he's like jumping across roofs, and the police catch up to him, and he falls off a roof. Dodo falls off a roof, and that's where part 1 ends. The book is divided into 3 parts, by the way. That's the end of the first part. So in the second act of our story, we don't get a ton from Dodo. So I'm going to talk about him really quick, and then we'll move on. But Dodo is taken to Penhurst. Both of his legs are broken, and so he's laid in like this crib, kind of. And he's next to this other boy who they don't know what's wrong with him at the time, but the author pretty much tells us that like he has cerebral palsy. They didn't know what to do with him, so they just sent him to the mental institution. He's wearing a diaper, and so like in his mind, Dodo calls him Monkey Pants. So he and Monkey Pants are next to each other. They meet, and they are roughly the same age, so they kind of become friends. That's all we hear from Dodo for now. In the meantime, Chona goes into a coma. Moshe is extremely upset. His only friend has left town. I mean, and this was a while ago. Malachi, the dancer, has went and gone back to Europe because he wasn't a big fan of America. So Moshe is trying to stay in touch with his friend, but things are just really hard now with Chona. Nate is not having a great time because he is furious that Dodo has been taken away. This is not what they wanted to have happen. And rumors start to spread around town about Doc Roberts' suspicious behavior. Nobody saw him feel up Chona, except for Dodo, who was in a mental institution. But when people were coming into the store, they know that the doc was there, Dodo was attacking him, and Chona's clothes were kind of not on right. So people are beginning to suspect that maybe Doc Roberts isn't who he claims to be. Not that he was ever that cool of a person to begin with. At this point in the book, we get a lot of different conversations happening between different people about what is going on. People in the community are putting together that Doc kind of sucks, and at the same time, news is spreading about what happened to Chona, and people are thinking about what happened to Dodo. We just got a lot of different conversations happening at the same time. In the middle of all this, Chona sadly passes away. It's pretty heartbreaking, and that's where the second act ends. I know it sounds pretty short. It was the shortest act, I think, of the 3 acts. There were a good 6 or 7 chapters, though. It was just a lot of it was conversation about what was happening to everybody. So then, Paper is somebody who is friends with Addie and Nate. Paper is her name because she knows a lot about things. So they call her Newspaper, or Paper for short. Paper learns of a way that they might get Dodo out. It's hard to kind of condense the plot at this point just because there's so many characters, there's so many moving parts to what is happening. I'm trying to tell it in order, but bear with me. Paper meets a friend, Miggy, Miggy tells her about somebody who works at Penhurst called the Son of Man. Son of Man is evil and has abused people in Penhurst before and may or may not have his sights set on Dodo, and they really need to get him out of there. Paper also learns that there's somebody who delivers hot coffee and eggs to all of the people at Penhurst via like this tunnel. He has like a cart and a horse, and he takes the cart and the horse through the tunnels which connect all of the different wards at Penhurst. And if you can kind of get through the Eggman, like he can maybe potentially take you to the same ward that Dodo is in, and you could get him out. Meanwhile, at Penhurst, Dodo and Monkey Pants have become really fast friends. They've learned a way to communicate with one another because Dodo can't hear anything, but he can speak, but he can't hear Monkey Pants. Monkey Pants has a really difficult time speaking because he has cerebral palsy, so Dodo can't read his lips very well. So Monkey Pants has come up with like this sign language almost, where like depending on the finger that he's using, Dodo can like get a letter and then they can kind of communicate with one another. While in the midst of their friendship, one night, Son of Man comes in to attack Dodo. And not to be gross, but it's in the book. By attack, I mean sexually assault. Monkey Pants has a seizure at the like perfect moment. He can't control it, but I think he just gets so worked up, and he ends up actually throwing feces at Son of Man to get him to stop attacking Dodo. And then everybody's like waking up, and Monkey Pants is having a seizure, and Son of Man kind of like leaves the situation and sparing Dodo. But this situation was so upsetting that Monkey Pants ends up passing away, which is really sad. I think it was probably the saddest moment for me in the book, maybe aside from Chona dying. And this is pretty impactful to Dodo. Back outside, Nate comes up with a plan to like get with the Eggman who delivers eggs to all the people at Penhurst and get Dodo out. So he pretty much sneaks onto the cart of the Eggman, and he like goes, so he's going into the tunnel, and the Eggman is delivering all the eggs, and he makes it to the ward where Dodo is. And Son of Man comes down to receive the eggs and coffee, and he's making like threats to the Eggman. He's just like Son of Man is just a really creepy guy. But Nate comes out of the cart, sees Son of Man, knows him, and kills him. Nate has a whole backstory, a whole dark past that we learn about in the book, that he had actually been to jail before, and he actually has this kind of darkness inside him, but that he is willing to call on that darkness if it's going to be to save Dodo. So he kills Son of Man, and then he goes up and he gets Dodo, and they make their escape. Outside of all this, Doc is actually killed by a hitman. I know it sounds random. I couldn't cover everything. It would take me hours, okay? But Doc is killed by this hitman. He's accidentally buried in this kind of like sewer, this manhole kind of thing. And if you recall the prologue of the book, they like find the skeleton. It's his skeleton. And he like had, like I mentioned the pendant, he had like Chona's pendant from when he was like feeling her up after her seizure. So yeah, Nate escapes with Dodo, and they go on to live like a really, really happy life in the epilogue. Dodo grows up totally fine. He gets married, he has kids. Nate is there. They help raise his kids. It's just really wonderful. It's a happy ending. It's a happy ending. And yeah, that's pretty much the plot of the book. There was a lot of stuff though I had to skip just for the sake of time. I mean, again, I could have been out here for like 2 hours, but at that point, just read the book. There's like a whole C plot that I skipped about like water usage in the town, which sounds dumb, but like there was water going to like the temple, and it was like going bad, and the water in the town had dried up because like years ago, like Chona's dad and Bernice's dad were friends, and Bernice's dad hooked them up with water, and no one knows where the water source is. So then like these other two people that I didn't even mention, who were big players in the story, Fatty and Big Soap, and down into the manhole, like reconnected the water, and then the manhole was open, and then the hitman who was for this totally other random guy that I don't even think is worth mentioning, killed Doc Roberts, and then Doc Roberts just happened to fall in the manhole, and Fatty and Big Soap didn't know, and they covered up the manhole. I know. There was a lot. It was a lot. There was no way I could cover it. I mean, if I was going to cover it all, I might as well have just read the book to you. So I did the best I could with the summary. I think I covered the most important parts. But anyway, it was a lot. Let's get into my review. Usually when I review things, I like to go in order. I do writing, premise, and purpose. But I'm switching the order this time a little bit because I felt like it served the story better. I'm going to kind of do what he did, how he did it, why he did it. So that would be premise, writing, purpose. So just stay with me. The premise of this book, I think, was pretty delightful. It really gave like fried green tomatoes meets To Kill a Mockingbird, kind of. That's at least what I was picking up. It was a really richly told story about how a community functions, especially a community as strange as this one. There were so many moving parts that you couldn't help but feel like it could be realistic. Even as I was reading, I was like reflecting on the complexity of what a community looked like, and I think that the author did a really good job of covering his bases as he was writing. There were three main plots going on, at least in my mind. There was the plot about Dodo, which was probably the main one, and then there was the plot about like Moshe and his problems, and then there was the plot about the water thing that I didn't even cover that well, but that was also there. And it was cool to see how like these three plots wove into one another and like how they all kind of tied up together at the end. It was a little long-winded at times, but that was kind of the point. If the goal is to get me a realistic picture of what this community looked like, then it was accomplished, I think. It was fun to read. It was delightful. Now the writing side of it. I guess that based on the prologue alone, the prologue is where they had found like the bones in the sewer, and they were like, I thought the rest of the story was going to be like, whose bones are these? Like, which, I mean, it is kind of, but I was expecting more of a mystery, honestly. Like maybe like Where the Crawdads Sing kind of vibes, but it was not a mystery. And so I think that the prologue was a little bit deceiving in that way. But the prologue also gave a lot of calls to the future, like a lot of names that you would not have known at all. And so like it wasn't even subtle enough that like it was one or two names and I could remember those, and then later in the book I would have been like, oh, that was in the prologue. It was just so much information in the prologue that like I just immediately tossed it all out, I won't lie. So I thought it would, like, based on the prologue, I thought it was going to be mystery, and then it wasn't, like, at all. Now the author does this really fun thing where like every time he introduced a character, we would kind of get their backstory, which you would think, I don't know. It was pretty fun. Again, going back to the premise, if the point was to describe a community, and you're going to do it through the people living in that community, it was pretty fun. It took me now, like in the first chapter, for a second I was like, where is this going? But then I was like, oh no, the point is just to tell a little anecdote about this person's life, and then we'll just move on. And it's pretty fun. It's like, I wouldn't say that this book was a page turner. It was more like a leisurely stroll. But there were elements of the plot that were really dark. And I feel like sometimes it almost could have been a page turner if it weren't for all of these winding side stories. I almost wanted, what I really wanted was one or the other. Like, were you gonna make this a story about the people in this town and like tell me about their life and their community and their upbringings? Like, are you gonna take me on this this adventure of this community, or am I gonna get this like dark mystery about the bones and the asylum and the assault? Sometimes these stories were really necessary to understand the motivations behind a character, For example, we got this whole backstory on Doc Roberts and about how like he like had a weird foot and so girls didn't like him, but he was like really into Chona and how that affected him as he grew up. And we got his insight, not that we were sympathizing with him, but then when he went to Chona's and then attacked her, it wasn't so random. That was a necessary detail that we needed in order for the story to make sense to the reader. However, I feel like sometimes the stories almost interrupted the flow of the plot. I'm thinking of a specific example at the end where Nate was right about to break into Penhurst. Like he was right about to get on the Eggman's cart and go into the wards. And we get this like a little side story. You feel it was really intense. And then they're like, this woman was the owner of this funeral home, but her husband died. And anyway, she was good friends with Nate. And it was kind of like this winding story that just was in the middle of what was happening. And I was kind of like, anyway, like there's more important things happening. So I felt like the winding, fun anecdotes were just contrasted a little too starkly against this really dark, like Penhurst, and so, like it was just, I don't know. I really, really did like the stories, but I felt like the plot was almost too dark to tell them. I also feel like there were so many things introduced, so many details, so many moving parts, and not all of them were tied up. We got the big tie-up, which is that Nate and Dodo kind of like lived happily ever after, and they grew up, and it was totally fine. But I'm like, well, what happened to Moshe? And what happened to Paper? And did like Paper ever marry Fatty? What about Big? Like there were like lots of characters that I wanted to kind of a nice little bow to, and I just didn't quite get that. But not a huge complaint. I mean, that's kind of how life is. Not everything gets wrapped up so nicely. I just wanted it. The purpose was to demonstrate the intricacies of a community. It was accomplished. The author was able to weave in, like I said, so many details and so many moving parts. It just felt so realistic. It was so fun to read. He did a good job showing how two wildly different communities can live together in harmony, and not just harmony, but like this kind of, they have this symbiotic relationship with each other almost. However, now I've said a lot of things like about the short story kind of anecdotes clashing with the plot. That's not really a complaint, honestly. It was just a comment. I really only have one complaint with this book, and otherwise it's fantastic. Otherwise it's great. My only complaint is that there was this random theme about the future that I just could not predict when it would be thrown in. And when it was thrown in, it just felt really disjointed from the story. I think the author wanted to make a point about how people who were evil in the past would have been evil in the future. Nothing would have changed. Or like society's darkness has always been the same. Whether it's in the 30s or the 70s or in the far off future of 2024, like there's always good and bad in a community. But like, okay, there's this one part that just really bothered me. I'm gonna open it. It was the same chapter where Chona died. Okay, it came out of nowhere. Chona is kind of having this vision right before she dies. And she like smells a hot dog, which is kind of weird because she's Jewish and she can't eat hot dogs. So she's like, why am I smelling a hot dog? And then the author throws this in, which is just completely wild. For in death, Chona had smelled not a hot dog, but the future. A future in which devices that fit in one's pocket and went zip, zap, and zilch delivered a danger far more seductive and powerful than any hot dog. A device that children of the future would clamor for and become addicted to. A device that fed them their oppression, disguised as free thought. Now, here, I am all about the theme of technology destroying childhood, because I wouldn't say I like wholeheartedly agree, but I do think that a phone addiction has gotten out of hand. It just felt like such a random thought to be thrown in the middle of this really important scene where Chona is dying. It just felt so random. Like, I thought the theme of this book was like the intricacies of community and like how we deal with one another and how like people can band together, but like just randomly in the middle of the scene, the author goes on this like 2-3 sentence tirade against cell phones, which, I mean, the book is taking place in the 1930s. It just like, it felt like the wrong message for the book I was reading. And I get that like the characters were like moving into the future. Like later, there's this character named Fatty, who I've mentioned, that kind of is like obsessed with like getting out of town. And then at the end, he's like, we're waiting for the future. Like, what's going to happen next? I just felt like, I don't know, like the cell phone thing was just a really unattached idea to what I thought the author was going for. And he never mentions it again. And he didn't mention it in the beginning. It just like felt completely random in this scene where my favorite character dies. That's my only complaint. So, I don't know. Maybe you got it. Maybe you understood it and I'm just too dumb. It just didn't make sense to me. But anyway, I did give it a 5 out of 5 on Goodreads. I know I just like went on a tirade about the themes, but I did give it a 5 out of 5. I think it really it was a good book. I think it deserves a 5 out of 5. I don't think it was perfect. It's not a 10 out of 5. But it was a 5 out of 5. It did its job. It was a delight to read. It accomplished what it needed to accomplish. It was great. Anyway, let's talk about my cover. Okay. I'm really trying hard to get better. And I was inspired by, first of all, this photograph that I saw on Tumblr, and then somebody that I follow on social media called, I'm just going to spell it, nkimillustrates. I am in awe of their background work. Like, their painting ability is incredible. I love it. And so I kind of wanted to do, like, I wanted to see if I could replicate, not their exact style, but, like, these, like, really pretty backgrounds. And I don't think I did a fantastic job, but I put in a lot of effort. I tried, and that's the whole point of the series, is just to try new things, which is what I did. Painting is hard. I don't have a lot of practice at it. And I also don't have a lot of patience. I really I want to finish it in like an hour, but I forget that I'm supposed to like enjoy the process along the way. It also made me want to go back to like pencil and paper. I know that I'm trying to get better at digital, but I need a lot of practice just with traditional media first. That's where I feel like I grew the most before I switched to digital. And so I actually sketched out the scene on a piece of paper before I did it on Procreate. I don't have a video of that. I just have the one on Procreate because it's easier to film. But I think it kind of helped me catch the vision a little bit better. And so I think this inspired me not only to paint more, but also to work in my sketchbook more. But yeah, I don't think it turned out terrible. It was kind of fun. Anyway, if you liked this video, it's kind of an abrupt ending. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe. I come out with videos every Tuesday. And if you would like to read what I'm reading next, I think my next book is How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix, which I really, really loved, the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, so I have high expectations for this one. And you can find the books that I'm reading for the next 10 weeks in the description. I'm trying to help make it not change, but sometimes it will. Hopefully that is the order that it goes in. Thank you so much for watching this super long video. I did really enjoy this book, and I had a lot of fun talking about it. I will see you next week, and happy reading. Bye!